For 24/7 FDV counselling and support, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732. LGBTIQA+ specialist FDV support is also available through the Rainbow Sexual Domestic and Family Violence Helpline on 1-800-497-212. In Western Australia, you can contact the Pride and Respect Specialist FDV Support Service on 0481 080 201. Support links are included in the show notes.
Welcome to the Pride and Respect podcast, where we discuss the difficult topic of family, domestic, intimate partner, and sexual violence within the LGBTIQA+ community. Each episode, we bring you genuine stories of lived experience and share empowering insights and advice from sector specialists. I'm your host, Dr Jack Farrugia, a researcher in the Youth Mental Health team at the Kids Research Institute Australia. I bring both research expertise and lived experience as somebody who is LGBTIQA+ and has previously experienced intimate partner violence. Thanks for joining us today. In today's episode, we discuss gender power and control in the context of family violence and trans and gender non-binary people. I'm very excited to be joined by two amazing guests. We have Paulie and we have Starlady. Thanks for being here today with me.
Hi, great to meet you. Great to meet you.
Thanks.
Starlady is a queer trans woman and feminine person living on Dja Dja Wurrung country and is the director of the Zoe Belle Gender Collective. She is passionate about social justice, the prevention of gender-based violence, and dismantling trans misogyny. Starlady is also the lead author and campaign director of Transfem, which is a campaign and website promoting healthier relationships between trans women and cis men. Thank you, Starlady.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we also have Paulie here. So Paulie is one of Australia's most prolific fantasy and sci-fi authors and game designers. Paulie is also a trans activist, and she has lived experience with familial violence and is keen to share her story. Thank you, Paulie.
Oh, great to be here. Great to meet you both.
Yes, you too. Well, look, I'm keen to know a bit about why both of you were keen to be involved in the podcast today. Paulie, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. All right. So I may not look it. I'm old. My experience with familial violence runs right back to my childhood in the early 60s. And I've had the full run of it from being thrown into man camp to learn to be manly, to rejection at different points as I tried to come out. I lost children. I lost everything. I've had abusive partners. So I've kind of got a wide spectrum, but also as a trans activist, I hear more and more of these stories, and they're tragic. And I think one of the things that I do is one of the reasons as an activist I fight so hard for the rights of trans youth. I would love there to be a generation that can come out, just have the joyous end and not have the end that's going to, cost you a lot of psychologist fees in later life. So yes, it's important to get these stories out and for people to know they're real.
And yeah, thank you for being here and willing to share yours. Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Oh, very happy.
And Starlady, why were you keen to be involved in the podcast today?
Well, I think like trans and gender diverse people, we have a right to access healthy relationships, to be affirmed in our gender identity, to have our autonomy over our own gender and bodies. We have a right to live our lives free of discrimination, stigma, and violence. But unfortunately, because of like transphobia, trans misogyny within our society, trans and gender diverse people face disproportionate rates of gendered violence, including family violence, like very high rates of family violence. And basically the whole family violence sort of like system has been historically, created and built to address cisgender men's violence against cisgender women. Mm-hmm. And what that's meant is that the whole entire system has historically and ongoingly really excluded trans and gender diverse people who are victims of violence. Mm-hmm. And I think that our community and that we deserve access to the same sorts of supports that cisgender women are getting. But there needs to be a lot of change in the system. And, as a trans woman who's experienced a lot of violence, who's experienced a lot of intimate partner violence, we want to advocate for our community for change, because we deserve better, we deserve healthier relationships, and we deserve to be supported, when we're victims of violence.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we're really excited to be doing with the campaign generally, but this podcast as well, is to be able to share these stories and hear from the voices of people that has experienced this violence, which, as we know, and as you were speaking to Starlady as well, often goes unheard, unrecognized in the systems. The systems are not built to support trans and gender non-binary people to seek support and, like you said, live healthy relationships. So we need to be talking about this stuff. This idea of gender norms, right? And really rigid, cisgender heteronormativity that really shapes not even just trans and gender non-binary people, but everyone's lives, and really struggling to sort of navigate that. And we know that these sorts of norms, impact people from a very young age, before people who are gender non-binary or trans even have the language to identify, who they are and what sort of works for them. So I'm keen to hear from both of you a bit about sort of what that sort of cisgendered and heteronormativity looks like in the context of family violence and from a young age. I might start with yourself, Paulie, and if you'd like to share a bit about your own experiences, I'm sure we'd love to hear.
From a young age, okay. So I came from a very rigid upper middle class family, and they were very, very deeply involved with the church. So my family had a history of people who were ministers in that church. My father was an elder in that church, as were my uncles, not my mother. Women don't do that. They don't speak up in church at all. You can arrange the flowers. You can lay out the hymn books. That's your lot. So born as like the eldest child into this, I had a expected role to play. You will be a man's man. You will be a leader amongst these men. You will crush down these women. But there are very rigid sets of behaviour, and it's reinforced by this massive church structure. And that church structure was quite horrifying, because what happens is you find that church groups like this have sufficient people and sufficient power to raise you entirely in a bubble where there is no other information about the outside world. The people you meet are in the church. The places you go are filled with people who are in that church. I was the sensitive little boy that wasn't like the other boys, and sort of liked my animals and liked reading, and the friends I had, I socialised with females. I did not like really socialising that much with other boys, because the behaviour that was being encouraged in them I did not like. From that very early age, that church organisation encourages you to be incredibly misogynistic, and I didn't want that. And that's when the punishment cycle began, because there is a plan and I am not operating according to the plan. So within that church group, there's a lot of pressures that can be brought to bear. Apart from the immediate family, just out and out punishment and violence, there's also your wider extended church family who will continue this on another level of social pressure and disapproval. When you are a 7-year-old child and you are dragged out from the entire church, which is everyone in your entire circle, to have these elders put their hands on your head and essentially pray the gay away in front of everybody, it is mortifying. It's absolutely humiliating. So after a while, you begin to learn masking behaviour very, very quickly, because what you want more than anything else is for that to stop. I don't want to be hit anymore. I don't want to be told I'm wrong and broken. I do not want to be dragged up in front of everyone as a freak of nature.
Yeah.
And treated as a freak.
Yeah.
And this extended even to things like school holidays and so forth, because schools are worried because you will meet other people with other points of view, but they tried to control that as much as possible. And a big part of that was being sent to man camp, which you would now quite literally call conversion therapy. You were sent off to learn to do boy stuff, and it would be pointed out that this kid doesn't do proper boy stuff. They're slipping. There's something wrong with this kid, so keep them away from socialising with girls. We're going to put them in this all-male environment where you are going to be taught to play football and play cricket and play war and scriptures, and more people with their hands on your head praying that gay out of you. And some of these camps were literally in the middle of absolutely nowhere, WA. So there's nothing but desert. So it's not like you could say, well, I'm 9, but what the hell? I'm going to put some food in a knotted handkerchief and I'm just going to, I'm going to run away from... no, I'm not. I'm stuck here for the duration. So, yeah, it was, again, you learn those masking things very quick. It was interesting because I found in later life, my father was quite a famous architect. There was another architect who I adored. He was flamboyant. He was kindly to me. I met him recently, 93 years old, and he saw that I'd come out and he lit up. He had introduced me to The Goon Show, which was a very famous radio comedy play. Part of the introductions was always they'd introduce the orchestra, which was Wally Stott. I suddenly found out Wally Stott had become a woman. Wally Stott was now Angela Morley. And that kind of lit up my world. It's like, hang on, what's this?
Yeah.
A man became a woman. Tell me more. So as I asked around and found things, even as a child, it's like, no, there are people who can change sex. And I made the mistake of actually kind of mentioning this, and then suddenly, of course, I'm forbidden to ever listen to that show again. I think their hope actually is that you'll be so thoroughly trained and so thoroughly inculcated by the time you get to that stage, there's no questioning. I have to say that, I'll tell this tale further on, but I lost my children through a lot of this. One of them I will never see again because I know exactly the rabbit hole they've been dragged down. They ended up in the care of that family who put them through this project from an age of about 7, and now 20 years later, I've never heard from them. I couldn't tell you what they look like. I've never been sent a photo, but I know they've gone into that religious sort of Assemblies of God community, and it's a rabbit hole. Once someone's in, there's no coming out.
I'd love to hear more about your experiences coming out and what that looked like within the family violence context.
I had a disastrous first coming out attempt, which, as I'd said, as an author, I'd had these books with female characters and so on. So I tried coming out to my wife of 26 years. So I sat down for that talk, and yes, I was told that the children would be taken away. I was being kicked out, and I would only essentially be allowed to see my children again and allowed back into normal human society when I was cured of this, and they were going to book me into proper psychiatric help. So I left, and so I'm one of the authors that wrote Dungeons and Dragons novels. I've been a role-playing gamer since it began in 1975. I moved in with my Dungeons and Dragons group. They took me in, and they have been my family of choice ever since. I still live with them, and they became my support mechanism. But even with that, I was so horrified by how trying to come out had gone that I continued to hide that. And then I got cancer. I got dragged into hospital, and it turns out I had kidney cancer. And I was told I only had probably about a 20% chance of surviving it. Oh, you'd be dead within a year. Says, right, one last book. So I sat down and did that. I survived it. But at the end of that, I decided, do not put aside the things that will make you happy and do not live a lie. So I came out. I was terrified, absolutely terrified. My first walk outside the house, dressed as actual me, and I lived. So from that day, I lived socially as a woman. Now, one of the things that happened was, because I'd had cancer, I was gate-kept by the medical community. I was told that if I did anything that involved my hormones, I would come out of remission and I would die horribly. So I figured maybe I just have to be an adult about this. All I can do is socially transition. One of the oncologists, when I said yes to Shank, so I just bitterly just want to go on HRT and I never can. And the oncologist looked at me and said, sure you can. But that's when I was able to finally go on HRT, and that's just changed my life.
Yeah.
It's been a lifesaver. A tail end on this. So my mother began dying of senile dementia. So I went over there, and I had just come out. So I went to see her in the home. And she saw me, and it lit up her entire universe. She thought I was her long-dead sister come back to her. I would phone in a couple of times a week just to talk to her. And for some reason, they were saying, oh, your mother's asleep, so we can't put you through. This went on for a couple of weeks. But I did know the night crew there because, I'd been there with them before. So I phoned through at night and got the night nurse who just said, your mother died 2 weeks ago. She died, and my family had kept it secret from me. That was the final, ultimate troweling of familial violence on my coming out.
Yeah. No, and thank you for sharing all of that. Well, and Starlady, I'm very familiar with your Transfem project. I was wondering if you'd be keen to tell the audience, the listeners, a bit about Transfem and your work on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a trans woman who, is attracted to men and dates cisgender men. Obviously, trans women have diverse sexualities all across the society, but I date men, in particular cis men. And I've just had a long history, as a trans woman, of experiencing gendered violence from men. And, Transfem was born of sitting around with many trans women that I knew who were all experiencing high rates of violence and not feeling like we had any access to supports, or that anybody was addressing these forms of violence. And so after many years of advocacy, we were finally offered some seed funding to create a website, a prevention of violence website that supports healthier relationships between trans women and trans feminine people and cisgender men. And so I've interviewed over 100 trans women and cis men about their relationships. And we created resources for cis men, the first in the world. We created resources for transgender women. We created resources for their family and friends. And later we also created the resources for practitioners, who are working within sort of family and sexual violence.
It's an absolutely fantastic resource, and I encourage all of the listeners, viewers to go check it out. And we will link it in the show notes and the description in the bio and all of that fancy podcast stuff. So yeah, thank you for sharing about that. It's really awesome work. Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about, how these sort of expectations of, cisnormativity and gender norms and whatnot sort of show up in these family violence contexts.
Yeah, well, I do think that, just in our society, young people, we're all expected to grow up to be cisgender and heterosexual. And when you fall outside of that experience, there can be an incredible lot of harm that occurs. And so we know that for, young people in our community, for LGBTI people broadly, we're often experiencing family rejection from our family, of origin. And because of, cisnormativity and transphobia and trans misogyny, we often sort of we can internalize that and we can minimize those experiences. We're not able to identify what we're actually experiencing is family violence. And also, I guess, within the sort of family violence system, that can also be minimized. Obviously, I work as work supporting with trans and gender diverse young people, and often I'm having, youth workers or other mental health professionals, bring me up and call me about a young person's, young trans and gender diverse person who's experiencing poor mental health and is really sort of struggling. And they start to, as they describe that experience, they started talking about how the parents aren't supportive. And when we start, I go, can you tell me what that looks like? And often we're hearing the families are being, incredibly abusive. they're shaming them and they're degrading them around their gender identity. There's power and control happening over. They're refusing to let them sort of affirm their gender identity. And I have to turn around and explain to these workers, going, what you're actually talking is about family violence. And, actually, are we trying to blame this young person? Is it around their mental health? Whereas what they're actually experiencing, family violence, and we need to acknowledge the family violence. If we address that, their mental health would, dramatically sort of improve. And I think these experiences of family rejection and family violence from when we're quite young often affect us throughout our life, because what it means is that we can be experiencing a lot of sort of rejection. We experience high rates of discrimination. How are you supposed to know what a healthy relationships looks like if your family has always treated you with disrespect? Can also, I guess, this idea of heteronormativity means that people, can often, like cisgender people in particular, can deprioritize relationships with trans and gender diverse people. And it can mean for us as trans people, we're so want to be loved. We have so much to offer, but we're sort of deprioritized, or we've experienced so much discrimination that sometimes our bar of what a healthy relationship looks like is so low, or we're just unaware that we're actually being treated with incredible sort of disrespect by our partners.
Absolutely.
And so it can be really hard for our community to identify our experiences of intimate partner violence or family violence, or when you think about all of the sort of history of like the prevention of violence, that it's only been framed as men's violence against cis women, how we are meant to identify our experiences of violence and then seek support. Because it's often trans and gender diverse people, I think, trans and gender diverse people, I find it really hard to identify those experiences. And then there's barriers. We don't feel worthy of accessing supports, or we're frightened to access those supports because we're worried we're going to experience, harm. And often the same sort of harms that we might be experiencing in our relationships or in our families.
Yeah, when you get that, when you have a set of family relationships that are that toxic, that profoundly affects what happens to you in romantic relationships later on. To you, a relationship is you just being on the receiving end of abuse. And I know that happened to me, horrific abusive relationships. And I absolutely know I'm not alone, because I'm the agony aunt for so many locals. I'm the one that picks up their stories. But and it is difficult, because you've had those expectations so drilled into you. It's very hard to take that look and suddenly say, this isn't how it should be. I'm prey for these people. I'm not a beloved partner. I am a subject of abuse that somehow is used to shore up someone's ego. But it's a very hard leap to be able to do that by yourself. Support groups and the support of friends and community helps enormously there, as people step in and say, hi, you're in an abusive relationship. But it's a hard thing to do for yourself.
And also, like, often people who use, adults who use violence, they weaponize transphobia and trans misogyny to sort of do harm and to stop us from accessing supports. They'll often tell people, like, I love you, I'm the only one who will love you, no one else will love you, no one will believe you. They often talk about, like, with services, people don't support people like you. And so they weaponize the transphobia and trans misogyny that exists in our communities to further isolate trans and gender diverse people and create further barriers for them being able to, access supports.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point that we're aiming to achieve with this podcast and this campaign, is to really raise awareness about the ways that family and domestic violence can look in, LGBTQIA plus context, but specifically as well trans and non-binary context. Because I think already when people hear the term, family violence or family and domestic violence, physical violence is the thing that is thought of right away, right? But as we're speaking to now, there are these things of power and control and coercive control and emotional abuse, they're all under the umbrella of family violence. But you say family violence, and I think that people aren't ready to recognize that those things are that. But then what does that look like when it comes to young people who are trans or gender non-binary or, LGBTQI plus in other ways? How does that all work, and how can we sort of name what that looks like? And people don't have that language because we aren't told that.
Yeah, violence comes in so many forms. So
yeah,
it's like when I say family violence, people think of you, beaten up by your dad or whatever, which certainly happened. But things like that socialized family violence with, being prayed over, being sent to these camps, these are all being told that your achievements are somehow diminished because we have to hide you, because we don't approve of you, and just the psychological damage that made, as you are made into a small, insignificant person because of your identity. And it's just better if we don't.
Yeah.
I ended up as like an Australian literary ambassador. I got flown to Washington, D.C. for a meeting with the vice president. You end up doing a reading in front of the librarians of America in the U.S. Library of Congress, the full kit and caboodle, and you come back and you find that, well, this has been deliberately hushed up by your family because it's better that no one knows, because by that stage I'd sort of made a coming out attempt, and it's like it's better if no one hears about you.
Yeah.
It's like, what, in case success is somehow linked to the fact that I'm flamboyantly feminine?
Yeah.
Shock. But the psychological violence is violence.
Yeah.
And when you get into partner relationships as well, you can end up on end of a lot of abuse, which never ends up with someone raising a hand to you, but they can crush you down and just destroy you mentally. There are so many weapons at their disposal to do it. And as I said, you're not that keyed into recognizing these as danger signs because you never had an education that told you that you deserve better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what we need to see. We need queer kids, trans kids, and young adults to know that this is not normal. You deserve the best relationships that you can get in all aspects of your life.
And educating everyone about what this type of violence, what family domestic violence can be, it benefits everyone. If we're raising more awareness about, hey, this is what violence might look like in trans and gender non-binary context, it will start conversations like we're having now around control and power imbalances and all that sort of stuff that anyone, regardless of your gender identity, can experience. And so I think that educating from a young age, just generally about, and breaking down those myths about family and domestic violence will hopefully lead to people having better language to recognize it. On the flip side as well, if we are taking that approach, we need to make sure that the systems and the services are set up to be able to support everyone, trans and gender non-binary people included, to be able to seek support.
Yeah, as I bumped into different groups as I've done my activism, it's interesting. You walk into like the police or something, they'll proudly, we've got our inclusivity policy. It says, I know, I helped author it. But here's the thing, having a lovely booklet means nothing until it rolls over into culture.
Yeah.
And that also means rolls over into training. Yeah. So having this doesn't mean that anything's getting better on the sharp end where we actually need it. So, there needs to be a better understanding of policy is a fine thing, but it means nothing unless it's implemented.
Yep, exactly. And Starlady, earlier you were speaking about some examples of family violence in trans and non-binary context, in the family context. Do you have any more examples about sort of what that might look like?
Yeah. Firstly, I think it's important to let everyone, all the listeners, know that trans and gender diverse people can experience the same types of family violence as anyone else. But we also can experience really sort of unique and specific forms of violence. And one of those in particular is around identity-based abuse. And identity-based abuse is where adults using family violence really exploit transphobia, transmisogyny, homophobia or biphobia to exert power and control over a person's gender identity, their gender expression, or, you know, all their sexuality. Some of the common ways that identity-based abuse occurs for trans and gender diverse people can be around things like threatening to breach out someone, to breach their confidentiality around their trans and gender diverse identity. Can also be around control, like once a person affirms their gender identity, and might be, you know, read as cisgender, where you can't tell that they have a trans and gender diverse history or experience. It can be around controlling who they can and can't disclose their transgender sort of like history or experience to. There can be things like where people might deliberately and persistently misgender and dead name trans and gender diverse people.
Mm-hmm.
Can be other things like trying to sabotage access to gender affirming care. It can be like policing or ridiculing people's gender expression or their clothing or other aspects of their sort of identity. Or it can just simply be around like the deliberate sort of like use of transphobic messaging in ways that are designed to shame, humiliate, or degrade or undermine people's sense of self or sense of self-worth, or undermine their sort of gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
So there can be many ways that sort of like gender identity-based abuse can occur. I think as a trans and gender diverse person, like how you begin to sort of like identify some of this identity-based abuse is really just to remember some of the core principles of trans and gender diverse human rights. And I would say one of those principles is around gender autonomy, you know, that we have the right to self-determine around our names, our identities, how we affirm our gender identity, around our bodies or how we express ourselves, and that anybody trying to police or control, you know, in terms of intimate partners or our families, trying to control any aspects of our identity, that is a form of family violence. Obviously, trans and gender diverse people can come out and affirm our gender identity at any age. For some people, that's younger, and some people that like might be older, you know, in their sort of like age. And one of the things we see when we're sort of like coming out to, you know, our partners, you know, it can be a really big thing. It can be a really big change, you know. And when we disclose that to our partners, you know, I think we're, you know, sometimes partners, you know, they might go, okay, that's a really big change. That's something new to me. It's something that I don't understand well. I don't know how that will impact our relationships. But the appropriate response is to say, but I just want to let you know that I love you unconditionally and that I'm here for you,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
you know? But when we see the next bit of when we see different responses, where we see intimate partners start to go, if you affirm your gender identity, I'm going to leave you, you know, making threats, where we see them, I'm going to kick you out of the house if you do that. I'm going to cut you off from our children or our family, or I'm going to cut you off financially. That's all family violence, you know, and that people, you have a right, if that's occurring, you to access family violence and to access supports, because you deserve to be treated, you know, with respect.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it took me years to come out again. The sort of extended family violence from that was amazing, because when I'd managed to leave, I was stalked by family. You'd find cars parked outside of friends' places where I was staying, I have to keep my Facebook profiles and everything closed to this day. If someone says, "Oh, great meme, can I share it?" if you open your profile for a minute to let them do it, family members will bust in and they will actually post transgender pornography as comments on all of my videos.
And again, where like you're identifying some really common forms of tech-based abuse that trans and gender diverse people like commonly experience. I know that like eSafety Commission has recently put out a series of resources for trans and gender diverse people to help them how to respond to their experiences of tech-based abuse. And we see that sort of tech-based abuse really sort of like rapidly growing as sort of like new forms or new emergence of how family violence is occurring for trans and gender diverse people. And also, Polly, before you were talking about like, really about sort of experiences from your family of like suppression techniques, which in, some places in Australia, like conversion therapy here in Victoria is like now unlawful, but these things are still sort of really common. Can I just ask, did you ever feel like you've experienced here some really sort of horrific forms of like family violence? Did you ever access or feel it was safe to access the family violence services or any sort of supports around these experiences? Or
Never. I'd been so mocked for any exposure of that sort of feminine side that what you didn't want was to walk into someone like police or some official services and they say, well, why are you on the receiving end of this? And so, I'm only going to make things worse was the thought going through my head. And so a lot of people are very reluctant to report violence because the general thought in the community is, what's the point? Yeah. You'll be mocked or you'll be ignored.
And this is one of the problems that we sort of like have within our community, because I think we've got a long and current history of experienced police violence or abuse by police. And if we think of the access and ways into the family violence sort of like system or systems to support, it's often through the police. And because we're experiencing so much violence and such a poor response, like I do want to say, Paul, you deserve to be respected. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to have the services in our society that are there to protect victims of violence, support you and treat you with the respect you deserve. You deserve justice. Well, we are often not afforded this. And so what we see is we're used to experiencing discrimination from the services that are meant to support us, and it creates further barriers. And this is why it's so important for family violence services and prevention of violence services to do so much more outreach into our communities. We need these services building relationships with our services, building trust with us, getting to know, employing us so that we can see ourselves within those services. Because why would we go unless that's sort of done? I often work with family violence services. I'm in Victoria, but often work with family violence services, and they're doing the internal training to make sure that they're ready to provide appropriate services to trans and gender diverse people. But unless you communicate to our community that you are welcome, that you are safe, and that we are here for you, we're not going to come to those services. A lot of damage has been done, and it needs to be sort of like recognized. And I think promotion and relationship building is really key to this. And obviously even we're building, in WA, you do have emerging sort of like LGBTI services where people do feel safe. And so I encourage people who are experiencing family violence to access services like Living Proud, to be able to go. And then they will also know the services, because they offer referrals that go out into the sort of like broader service sector to know which services are safe. Because unfortunately, we're still at a stage where some family violence services or services that support victims won't be safe for trans and gender diverse people, but others will. And services like Living Proud will know that and can sort of navigate that. But if people do experience family violence, you deserve to be able to access supports.
I was contacted just last night by another trans woman that had been attacked, and she was wanting to know, I'm taking this guy to court. Where do I go for legal representation that's not just going to mock me for being trans? So I actually had to – you're obviously the one person that'll know. So, I access different services to say, well, you've got to talk to these people. But those bridge services are vital, because otherwise, you're right, you can walk into a lawyer's office and they'll just laugh. It's like, what's the point? I mean, you've chosen to live this way. So therefore you've chosen the abuse. It's like, no, I haven't actually. I have a right not to have that abuse. Being thrown into psychologists' offices where they've come in and said something's wrong with this person, fix it. And you're told, well, what's wrong with you? He says, well, I think I might be a woman. Whereupon you would get on the end of quite a hostile mental health professional who's then sort of telling you, well, obviously, yes, you are sex. So let's see what we can do to get you out of this appalling situation you've somehow got yourself into. So with that, a lot of people are very reluctant to access mental health services, which they should not be. It's vital.
Yeah.
In many cases, people have done things that have put their lives in danger, that's put their health in danger, and has always put their mental well-being in danger to keep up that pretense and that myth which is being forced on them by the violence they're receiving from partners and families to push them into this cis heteronormative mold that they had to be in. Even today, I'm perfectly aware of my scars and quirks. It's like even today, I'm sitting with my back to the wall where I can see the entrances because that's someone who's had abuse.
Yeah.
You can spot that in a room instantly. These scars people shouldn't have to have.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess my wish for the community is, may the scars fade, but the wisdom remain.
Yeah. We, as in the community, can only do so much to learn about and recognize, when this violence and this family violence occurs for us. But the systems in place need to be better at also recognizing what power and control can look like in family context and in gender non-binary context, and actually be there with the capacity to be able to support. We can create these specialized services and get a bit of funding to do so, which is better than nothing, but it doesn't stop here. We need to continue to advocate for the experiences of gender non-binary and trans people with family violence, because if we stop, the systems aren't going to change. We can recognize it ourselves, we can have the language to name it, but the systems and the mainstream systems need to be competent, more than competent, to be able to help as well.
Yeah.
And there are resources out there to help support that. Like I know Rainbow Health Australia in the last few years created like an LGBT, how to develop an LGBTI inclusive refuge, and those sorts of resources can help services when they're thinking about sort of refuges that support victim survivors, how to make sure that they're safe and inclusive and welcoming for trans and gender diverse people. But I also just want to touch on Paulie's points about, like, I think currently within our sort of like the broader trans and gender diverse community, because we don't often feel safe accessing services, who we turn to is other trans and gender diverse people. And it can put such an incredible weight on our community of having to, respond to sexual violence, family violence, and mental health crises that are occurring within our communities. But there are also resources out there to help us to be able to better respond to that. And so I know like the Say It Out Loud website that's been produced by like ACON has a really great series of resources around like helping people identify it. It also has really great resources on how to, if somebody discloses to you that they've experienced sexual violence from within the LGBTIQ community, what's an appropriate response. And so there are things we can do within our community to build up our skills and capacities to be able to appropriately respond and to support our friends. I'm the first trans person that has ever been invited to those spaces, and it shouldn't just be me, like in representing our community. Like I think within our community, like trans First Nations, trans and gender diverse people, including sister girls and brother boys, trans people who come from refugee and migrant backgrounds are being disproportionately impacted by that violence. And where are they at the table? And that they should also be there. And often their voices aren't. And so we have to make sure, even within our community, we're making sure the people who are at the most sort of margins, we're bringing them along, and we're bringing all of our community along.
Yep.
Yeah.
It'll take all of us to create a change, and all of us working together. So thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also the government officials and policymakers listening. And from the research perspective as well, prior to the Pride and Respect campaign being a thing, I was one of the lead researchers on Safer Options, which was WA's first research exploring LGBTQA plus people's experiences with intimate partner violence and how to improve primary care providers' responses and whatnot. And, doing that research, we heard a lot about from, the community members who have experienced this violence that, hey, we've told people this before. We've told our stories. We've done this research. What's going to come from that? And we developed a website. We developed the resources which helped lead to this campaign now. So we can sort of see, some change happening from the research. But so much of the time, in research and in, consultations and whatnot, our communities are over-consulted. And you were saying, Starlady, the same people such as yourselves are the ones who are the ones doing all of this really important work. The one or two trans or non-binary people in the room, we need...
People make a lot of laws without consulting us.
Exactly.
When I go and see these people, I'm often the first trans woman they've ever met. I've had federal ministers and their staff in tears as they go over our lives.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't live like that. So we have to.
A lot of the people in charge of the systems that are in place that aren't right for us need to just talk to more trans people, talk to more non-binary people, and just have general conversations, and then sort of break whatever perceptions they've got about the community in their head. The systems, as we're talking about, aren't set up to allow trans and non-binary people to succeed, family courts, legal systems and whatnot. So how else can these systems improve? How else can these family violence, family courts, legal systems and whatnot improve to better support our communities that need it?
First, I just want to talk about coalition building, and often I think within the family violence system there is this and feminist movement. There's these false narratives that are going within our society that try to pit trans and gender diverse communities and women's rights as mutually exclusive, where in fact our movements are aligned. Like, our trans and gender diverse people stand in full solidarity with feminist movements. And often when we think about the drivers of violence against cisgender women, they are the same as some of the violence against trans and gender diverse people. And so we're talking about rigid gender norms and stereotypes and dominant forms of masculinity that harm both of our communities. If we come together and we work together, I think we can become a very sort of powerful movement. And I would often talk to sort of like feminist services, prevention of violence services, and I talk about how increasingly within our society, transphobia and transmisogyny are being used to reinforce rigid gender norms and dominant forms of masculinity. We see like even cis women who are accessing toilets who potentially don't meet societal's expectation of being hyper feminine, where they're being accused of being trans. And so we begin to see where these forms of violence, if we let them go, they create harm for anyone.
Yeah.
And this is where our movements are sort of like, aligned. And so we've got to challenge this narrative that sort of falsely premises that trans women are a threat to cis women. There's no evidence of that. What we know is that trans women and trans feminine people are much more likely to be victims of violence, and that our movements with feminist movements are aligned.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where, this dominant, toxic masculinity in society generally, and how that looks like in family contexts, we know is a huge driver of family and domestic violence. Not the only driver. Part of this campaign is to understand other ways that can sort of what that can look like, but it's the reality, right? There's a reason why these systems are set up the way that they are, is because of the way that masculinity can sort of lead to violence, and then what that looks like in standard traditional, in quotation, cisgendered heteronormative context, but then what that does look like for LGBTQA plus and trans and non-binary contexts as well. And something that I've spoken about in our previous episodes is, everyone, period, knows what it's like to be othered, or knows what it's like to not fit in some type of way. And I think that the moment that people who aren't a part of our communities recognize that, I like to think that might bridge some understanding to what it can be like for us, because we're in much more heightened contexts, and Starlady, you were saying, that the movements are aligned, and to me that really sort of resonates with that sort of perspective that I'm speaking to, is that if we can sort of just get on the same page that we need to address the way that masculinity can be really harmful to a lot of people, cisgender women and trans and non-binary people as well, then we can work together and make a real difference and really target those really key drivers of family violence when it comes to masculinity. And look, and I'm sure listeners would like to know as well, what has helped you to get where you are now, and if there's anything you'd like to tell anyone who might be experiencing similar types of family violence.
Amongst the things you have to bear in mind is that you are not alone. I felt entirely alone. There is a community of transgender people to reach out to, and they are always there. You will always be their brother and sister as long as you live. They will do anything to support you. The constant barrage of bad news of vicious, genocidal laws coming out left, right and centre, that does look bad and it leads to despair, but never forget that there is a silent crew of people like Starlady, like myself, like 100 others who are just working to make this better. You may not see us, but we're there. So don't despair. Do not doom spiral. My advice to everyone is live magnificently and fight the bastards. There's someone out there to talk to.
Yeah.
It may be family. It may not be. Family of choice is vital. When I came out, everybody in my life left me. So rebuilding those networks is a huge, huge task, just trying to find friends again. But there's people out there.
Yeah. And Starlady, what needs to change for the systems in place to better recognise family violence in trans and non-binary peoples?
Firstly, CGBC has just done some really amazing work with Safe and Equal, which is the peak family violence organisation, family violence and prevention of violence organisation here in Victoria. And we've created a new trans and gender diverse Pacific family violence assessment tool for MARAM. I really encourage, we're releasing that in May. I really encourage all practitioners to learn about that, because how can we provide trans and gender diverse people appropriate family violence supports if we can't properly assess them? And so people can use that tool and other tools to develop their sort of capacity. I encourage people to sort of access training. I also ask, services broadly, we need you to step up as allies. We need you to actively change the system. Trans and gender diverse people, we can't do that ourselves. We need our allies to step up, to bring us to the room, to bring us to the table, and to change the system so that we have better access to services. And for trans and gender diverse people, I just say you deserve to be loved, you deserve to be respected, you deserve healthy relationships. And to our family and friends, yes, sometimes I think we see higher rates of poor mental health, suicidality and self-harm or family violence, for trans and gender diverse people, but it doesn't need to be that way. If you show us love, respect, affirmation, then we're much more likely to feel affirmed and happy and supported in our lives. So as allies, you can protect us. We're seeing this significant wave of transphobia and transmisogyny that's occurring globally. We need your support. We need you to step in and to provide us sort of the protection and allyship so that we are safe during these times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a fantastic way to wrap up our conversation. And just to our listeners, remember, you are not alone. Please do check out Transfolk of WA as well to seek support there as well. Thank you so much, Paulie and Starlady, for joining me today. This has been an absolutely wonderful conversation, and I'm just really grateful for sharing your stories, Paulie, and for all your insights as well, Starlady. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Great to meet you both.
Yes, you too.
If anything in this episode has raised concerns for you, support is available. If you're in immediate danger, call 000. For 24/7 FDV counselling and support, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732. LGBTIQA+ specialist FDV support is also available through the Rainbow Sexual, Domestic and Family Violence Helpline on 1800 497 212. In Western Australia, you can contact the Pride and Respect Specialist FDV Support Service on 0481 080 201. Thanks for listening to another episode of Pride and Respect, a community partnership between Living Proud, Grey, Transfolk WA and WAC, generously funded by the Department of Communities. If this conversation was meaningful to you, please subscribe or share with others. To get more information, leave feedback or access the show notes, visit prideandrespect.org.au.